Today we are showing an MSV90. We want to discuss a little bit what kind of faults MSV90 can have, which one are repairable easily or less easily. And we are using an aftermarket board over here, but it is basically the same of an original one, so you will find out that this is completely fine to use. So the first main issue I want to talk with you today is the most complicated one, is the CPU problems. CPU problem can be two different kind of issues. One is a communication fault. Another one is internal error on the CPU. When you have internal error on the module or on the CPU, the problem is usually that some of those BGA pads under the CPU are not connecting well. This usually happens because too much heat, some pads will move around because the ECU has a high temperature, and so the soldering is not that well done. The only way to solve this is to reflow or reball the CPU. Depending on how complicated it is, reflow may not solve it. So reflow is just heating the CPU until the BGA is almost desoldered, and then just leave it in place so it will solder back in position. Reballing is that you need to remove the CPU and change the tiny tin bolts under it, all of them, and then resolder it back. That's much more difficult, so that's why this is not for everybody. The other issues that will come now are a little bit more easy to solve. So if your problem is with communication, but you don't have a communication fault, you just cannot communicate with the DME, problem should be this one. This chip is a transceiver, which is a flex-ray transceiver. And why is that important is because it allows the ECU to communicate with the gateway. If this chip is not here, the ECU will still start the car sometimes, but you will not have any communication with the ECU in diagnostic mode. A lot of people who have this problem is because they buy this kind of aftermarket ECU from some seller which will sell it without the chip to save some money, because this chip is like $80, so it's quite expensive. So if your ECU works fine and you just bought it and it's an aftermarket ECU and there is no communication, then most likely you're missing this chip. Luckily this chip doesn't have any mobilizer or anything, so you can just move it from another ECU. The only problem is that it's 64 pins, so it's not that easy to solder either. Next one we're going to talk about are the chips over here which control the power supply. This one is our power supply main driver, and these capacitors over here, usually you may want to review them when you have some power supply fault. If you have oxygen sensor related faults, those two are your oxygen sensor related chips. So they are identical, so if one of the two is off, you can just replace it with another one from another ECU. Another important thing is over here, those IGBTs are all related to ignition. If you want to test them, you can set your multimeter to diode mode. So let's compare the readings of the IGBT by setting the multimeter in diode mode and then connecting like this. So here you see we have 0.69. If we reverse it, we have 0.61, 69, and 63. 69 and 63. Again 69 and 63. 69 and 62. And last one 69 and 62. So more or less they are all the same. Another important chip is over here. This is our barometric pressure sensor, which checks the pressure of the air outside. If you have pressure sensor fault, like the readings of the pressure sensor are not right, just replace this chip. Another thing that you may want to work on is the Valvetronic faults, which is quite common. Valvetronic faults usually come out of this area over here, as those chips control these two chips over here are used also to solve the typical terminal 15 fault. because they control the fuel injection. So these are our fuel injection drivers. If you have Valvetronic fault, but the problem is not with those chips, then you may want to check 1 and 2. Those two are both drivers for the Valvetronic system. And of course, if those capacitors are leaking, then you need to also clean up them, but this is not such a common fault. Another thing you may want to check is on the back. If you have BSD communication fault, there is over here there are several 8-pin chips. Now those 8-pin chips, they will have a name which is TJA 110, and then there is another 2 numbers. It can be either 1050 or 1020. On the 1020 there are 2, and if you have BSD fault, then the fault is with those chips, so you can just replace them. 1050, they are managing communication on CAN, so you don't need to touch them if you have fault on BSD. These chips are very important. Almost every ECU has at least one of them, even if it's not 1050 or 1020, can be another one, always starting with TJA. They are all CAN transceivers mostly, and they handle the communication for CAN. And as you see, there is always more than one, as there may be more than one CAN system inside the ECU.
Mainly faulty components on MSV90 Overview. TI1020 transceiver, replace it if you have BSD communication fault. TILA7209 driver and the transistors are related to the common Valvetronic faults. ATIC61D3 is another main driver for Valvetronic. SAC-CIC Osmex 2HT is a flex-rate transceiver if ECU has no communication and diagnosis. Most likely chip is not even on the ECU. Aftermarket ECU makers do not include it most of the time to save on costs. TC1796 CPU is often requiring reflowing or reballing as the BGA connections fail over time. Communication faults or internal faults will require to work on the CPU. ATIC91C5 is a power supply chip, and the capacitors nearby are also related to power supply issues. The 8207 ignition IGBTs are important too. Check if you have troubles with ignition. The 2 ATIC94D fuel injection driver chips are often causing the common KL15 terminal fault. SMD288 is the barometric pressure sensor. If you have wrong pressure readings, it might be broken and need replacement. A 2C56944 are the oxygen sensor chips. If you have faults related, you should check these 2 chips.